Are you tired of spending too much of your hard-earned money at the supermarket? Are you dreaming of farm fresh eggs, homegrown veggies, and homemade everything? Well, welcome to Ditch the Store, where we break free from supermarket dependence and take back control of our food and household essentials. I'm CJ, and I'm here to show you that life is too short for store-bought eggs. So let's get started. G'day everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ditch the Store. I'm CJ. If we haven't met before, I am a farmer, a mum, currently on long service leave from my day job and trying to manage all the homesteading things. And sometimes it's a bit of a challenge. I'm a little croaky as I am still recovering from pleurisy, which I had 2 weeks ago, and it's still lingering with me. I said it last week, I don't want to do all the whole ugly boogly thing, but ever since I had COVID, or I should say ever since I had the COVID jabs, because I actually had one bout before I had actual COVID, I have had chest infection after chest infection, and it really is driving me batty. But I should also point out that before I was a healthy, alternative, organic-y kind of farmer, I was also an absolute chain smoker. So from my mid-teens to late teens through till early 30s, I smoked very heavily. And before I decided to get pregnant with my daughter, I gave up smoking. So I guess I'm a walking poster child for why you shouldn't smoke heavily in your 20s, because it will come back to bite you in your early 50s. Anyway, I am getting there. If I have to pause for a cough, there may be a little glitch in the system, but don't stress. I have got a cup of tea here with me, with tea bag still in, to give myself some sips along the way to make sure I don't get too bad. Anyway, we are on sourdough months at the moment, so we're talking all things sourdough, and I really think this is a great time to be thinking about sourdough. Here, just outside of Canberra in southern New South Wales, we have just started to get our kind of cold snaps, and I actually think we've had a pretty mild start to winter at this point. We haven't had any what I call deep frosts. We've had a couple of minor low-level frosts, but only a few. We haven't had any deep frosts, but what better time to be baking bread than in the middle of winter? In the beginning of winter and heading into winter. We've got the fireplace going. We don't have a proper oven here as such because we're completely off grid, and ovens do draw a lot of power. We have a backup generator for when there isn't enough sunlight to keep the batteries charged. So I have just discovered a way to cook in my Dutch oven, in my casserole pot, on the stovetop for baking. I'm going to give it a try. I'll video it and let you know what the results are for those that are like me and heading for an off-grid lifestyle. I cook on top of my wood fire. It's just a normal wood fire that you would have in a lounge room. It's not a cook stove wood fire. I haven't had the money to buy one of those. It's my long-standing dream to buy a beautiful big wood-fired stove. But this one is just a normal wood heater, and I cook on top of it all the time. I always have the kettle on. I've got kettles on it at the moment and pots of water. So I always have boiling water on there. I figure there's no point wasting the energy that comes from burning the wood. So if I can heat up water to use for washing up, washing, making cups of tea, things like that, then I've always got it on there. Anyway, starters. We're going to talk all things starters. Now, I did briefly touch on starters last week, but there's a lot to it. And there's a couple of things that I'm probably going to pronounce wrong because they're scientific names and I'm useless with that shit. But what is your sourdough starter and why do you need it? So normal bread, commercial bread, is made with yeast. And traditional bread, so our ancestral diets, when humans first started to process foods in order to make shelf-stable, transportable foods versus cooking a leg of an animal over a fire and eating it straight away before it went off. When we first started doing that, we initially, and I'm talking biblical days, Egyptian days, we were making flatbread. So bread that didn't rise. It was just flat, flour and water, nothing else in it. And while it was good and everything, it could be quite heavy and dense. And people, and I don't even know who, I should go and have a look and find out who actually started making starter. But what happened was they decided that people over time decided that they wanted bread that had rise to it and that they wanted it to be softer and lighter. And they made sourdough. Now, they made sourdough by making the original version of yeast. So the yeast, the commercial baker's yeast that we get in the store is made chemically. It's made commercially. But you can make it in your own home without any special equipment at all. This is my sourdough starter here. Harry, you got to name your sourdough starter. It's one of those things you have to name him. So this is Harry. Harry's been going for 2 years, so same base for 2 years. And I'll go through and talk about refreshing, but flour and water. That's it. Literally, that is all that Harry's ever had put into him. So by adding flour and water and mixing them together, leaving them out at room temperature, so we want bacteria to actually kick in and function. And when that bacteria kicks in, something really crazy happens, and that is wild yeast. So it is yeast. It does exactly the same things as baker's yeast does, but it's completely natural. It's flour and water. And when I say it's completely natural, obviously that's processed flour going into there. You can make it with very rough ground flour, and we'll talk about flours next week, so I won't go into that too much. But it's the friendly bacteria, and it basically does a little science experiment on your kitchen counter where it draws in bacteria from the air and it has a bit of a boost together. And what it does is the natural sugars in the flour release a carbon dioxide gas, which creates bubbles and makes it rise. So Harry was fed this morning, and I don't know whether you can see, there's a little bit of a jiggle there. I'm just trying to hold him up. He's a little bit fluffy and a little bit jiggly at the moment. That's probably the best angle you can see it on, that jiggle. So it gets all bubbles in it and it ferments. And when it ferments, when it gets to its peak of its rise, that's when you want to use it. That's when you want to use it for making bread. So putting that into another mix of flour and water with a little bit of salt causes a reaction that makes the dough that you've made out of the flour and water to lighten, soften, and rise. And that's how we make bread. Seems pretty simple, doesn't it? So the science bit, for those that geek out on science shit like I do, the wild yeast is, and I'm reading this because I'll get it wrong, Saccharomyces cerevisiae. Look it up. It's wild yeast. Look up what the scientific name is. And lactic acid bacteria, which is lactobacillus, which lactobacillus is in lots of foods that we eat. And that's what makes wild yeast. Now, the wild yeast, and the reason it makes the bread rise is because it eats all the sugars. So flour, for anybody that's studied anything to do with glycemic indexes and blood sugars and things like that, carbohydrates raise our blood sugar. They do that because they have natural sugars in them. Now, you might think, but flour's not sweet like sugarcane or fruit or things like that. But that's not how it works. It's the carbohydrate value of it that makes it have those natural sugars in it. So we're not saying it's sweet sugar. We're saying it's a sugar that is an edible version for the bacteria. So the bacteria eats the sugars, and then that bacteria stays in the bread. Now you think, bacteria, I don't want to eat bacteria. But there's bacteria in everything. We have gut bacteria that we have to function. Fermented foods contain bacteria that they develop in the fermentation process, and that's what gives them tang and taste and things like that. And sourdough bread is no different. It gets its wonderful taste from the bacteria. So having that bacteria in there is what gives it that sour taste. And you can tell when you smell it, and obviously you can't smell it, but at the moment, Harry smells a little bit like nail polish. There's a slight nail polishy tang there. Not overpoweringly like nail polish. He hasn't gone bad, but it's just a real slight tang, like acidic smell. And those acids, the good bit about sourdough, this is where it differs from your commercial bread, is that it breaks down gluten. So even people like me who are very, very sensitive to gluten, when I eat sourdough, I don't get the same reaction. I still can't eat it in, massive quantities, but for those people that have been gluten sensitive for most of their life and had to avoid bread but love the taste of bread, the idea of being able to have a piece of bread and not have a reaction is life-changing. It's like, even with all my carnivore shit that I carry on about, I like eating a variety of food, and I do like the taste and texture and feel of bread. I do like including it in my diet. I haven't been able to do it for a long time because of the gluten issues. But sourdough breaks down the gluten, and I'm going to read from here because it breaks down the phytic acid, which makes bread easier to digest. So even if it's not a gluten intolerance kind of issue that you have, but just bread in general, carbs in general that you struggle with. And, I mean, from all my studies on the carnivore stuff, I know that all plant matter has toxins in it. It's just different levels of toxins. So, and those toxins affect people very differently. So there are some people like I want to say Michaela Peterson, but she's married now, so it's not Peterson. Jordan Peterson's daughter, she lives on a Lion diet because all plant toxins affect her, and a whole bunch of other toxins in other foods also affect her. So she literally eats red meat, and that's it. That's all she can eat. Now, I feel sorry for her. She has medical issues. That means that she has to do that. But for those of us that only have like an intolerance or a sensitivity to something, if you can include bread in your diet just by simply changing over to sourdough, kind of seems like a no-brainer to me. If you like bread, if you don't like bread, skip the next 6 weeks because we're going to be talking all things bread. Anyway, so it breaks down the sourdough bacteria in the wild yeast, breaks down things and makes your digestibility of your bread much simpler for your body because it's breaking down some of those things that would be normally toxic and not very digestible. Anyway, so I'm just having a look here to see what else I've got. Yeah, the wild yeast, I put that in there. So the thing is that it doesn't matter where you are in the world, and it really, we'll talk about flours next week, but without going into it, it doesn't really matter what flour you use. Gluten-free flours, a little bit harder. You can do it, but a little bit harder. But all you need is water, preferably rainwater, or filtered water. But to be honest, when I lived at Gunning, we were on town water there, and I made beautiful sourdough starter without any problems. So any water, any flour, chuck it in a bottle. Equal mixtures is the easiest way, but I do have a sheet that I'll talk about at the end. And of course, once you get your sourdough starter going in a jar on your kitchen bench, you've got to name it. So if you do name it, please post a photo on social media and link me in and let me know what the name is of your particular sourdough, because I would love to know what you've decided to call it. Like I say, mine's Harry because he's a little bit fluffy, but I'd love to hear from you. Now, how to make it. Now, I've got a cheat sheet that I'm going to give out at the end. I'll put a link in the show notes. So I do have a cheat sheet for you to follow. But the simple way of doing it is this. And if you're driving or out walking, you don't have pen and paper, don't stress, because if you download the cheat sheet at the end, you'll have it all in a lovely document that you can just print out and tick off as you go. But to make your sourdough starter, you've got to get the fermentation process going. You can't make sourdough is not a bread that you can make the next day. You have to plan for this. So if you're thinking in a month's time, I might want some sourdough, start doing your starter now. The older your starter is, the better it copes. So like I say, he's 2 years old and he makes awesome bread, really high rise, beautiful. I get a lot of lift in it, a lot of yeast reaction in it. So what you need is a glass jar. This one is a 1 litre, but honestly, a 500 ml would be fine. And it doesn't even have to be a special glass jar. It could be a recycled one that you've just washed out, got rid of the label, give it a good soak, make sure it's really clean. Not metal. You don't want metal. And people say that, but I still use a metal spoon and fork to mix my sourdough, and I've not really had a problem with it. And I've seen bakers who, well, they don't store it in metal. They've used metal implements and not had a problem either. But the funny bit is I actually have a lid on this that I want to try and show you. It has got a big split in it. It's got a split just there. Maybe I'll see it properly in the light, but it's got a split and it actually works perfect for me because I really couldn't use it for anything else because it doesn't seal properly. You don't want this to seal properly. You want airflow. You want bacteria to be able to get in and out. So the fact that this lid's got a split in it, I love it because even though it's a plastic lid, it's got the split, which means it's not locked tight. Now, what flour you use, we'll discuss next week, but wholemeal or rye flour is a great one to start with because it gives it a jump start. It tends to ferment quicker. If you only have white flour, so long as it is not bleached white flour, please don't use bleached. Don't use bleached flour for anything. But unbleached white flour is more than fine. It takes a little bit longer to get your fermentation happening. But if, like I say, sourdough is it's not a quick bread. So it's not something you're going to start the sourdough starter and make bread tomorrow. That's not going to work. Room temperature water. Now, some people are really funny about this and they say it's got to be a certain, 70 degrees Celsius or whatever that is in Fahrenheit. I don't go that far. I just turn the tap to hot and make sure that it's at least, I could put my finger in it. It's not boiling hot, but it's not stone muddles cold either. So lukewarm water is fine. As I said, filtered is better if you can, but if you can't, one thing you can do if you're in an area where chlorine is added to water and it's quite significant numbers added to water, one thing you can do is fill up a glass jar without the lid on and just sit the glass jar on your bench overnight. And what will happen is some of the chlorine will evaporate off that water so that you're not using super, super chlorinated water. To be honest, I don't know that it matters that much, but if you're in a hurry or you really want to get your fermentation happening, then it's probably better to use filtered water. A spoon or spatula for mixing. The really important thing is when you measure everything out, and I always say use scales. I get a bit slap happy now and tend to just roughly estimate, but I've been doing it for a few years now. So I've been doing it for about 6 years because I had a 4-year-old sourdough before this one. So I'm pretty good at eyeballing how much water and how much flour is in there in equal amounts. But the way that I do it, and there are a whole bunch of different ideas, is ratio of 1, 1, 1. 1 amount measure of sourdough starter. When you're first starting, 1 and 1. Flour, 100 grams, water, 100 grams. Measure it out. Put it in the glass jar, clean glass jar, give it a really good mix. You don't want any clumps of flour sitting in there. You want it really whipped up. Whip it all up, then either put cheesecloths with an elastic band or, like me, a lid that's broken that you're trying to reuse that doesn't seal perfectly but does protect it from anything crawling into it. You don't really want flies, ants, things like that in your jar. But you want air circulation because it has to do its thing where it ferments. So cover it in some way so that nothing will get in, like I say, a piece of cheesecloth or something like that over the top. One of my beeswax wraps that I sell on Amazon, I use them occasionally. If I didn't have a broken lid that I'm trying to utilise rather than throw out, I would probably be using one of my beeswax wraps because you can just push them down over the top and squeeze them in. They stop things getting in, but they're not airtight. So that's a good system for it. And then leave it on the bench. Now, this is where the fun starts and it turns into a real science experiment. So the next day you take 100 grams out. So you can take, whatever amount you take out, you've got to pick an amount. And I do it in 100 gram lots. Some people do it in 50 gram lots. Some people do it in 200 gram lots, depending on how much bread they're making. But what you want is equal quantities of starter, flour and water. So just say you had 200 grams worth of flour and water that first day. I would take 100 grams out, leave 100 grams of starter in the jar, add 100 grams of flour, 100 grams of water. Really stir it up, give it a good mix, make sure everything's incorporated together, leave it for another 24 hours. 24 hours time comes, you're going to come back, you're going to notice a couple of things. One, it started to fizz and bubble a little bit. Not massively to start with. In the first week, do not be surprised if it really looks like it's going nowhere. You'll be thinking, why am I doing this? Because it's just, honestly, nothing's happening and CJ's full of shit. Bear with me. It'll get better. So every day you want to refresh your starter. That's what they mean when they say refresh your starter. And that is where you take a little bit out. When I say a little bit, half is probably good, but you can take more out. I've seen a baker online who uses only 10 grams of starter to start his next batch of starter. So you can really do it with that little, but it depends how much you're using too. I put 100 grams into a recipe. So for me, it's always been easy to do 100 grams of flour, 100 grams of water to start with, and then always leave 100 grams of starter in because I take 100 grams out. Now, then that builds up after time, so you end up with a little bit more starter. You can always gift that to somebody. It doesn't matter. So each day you want to take out a portion of the starter, whatever portion you decide to keep, whether it's 50 grams or 100 grams, you add the same amount of flour and water into that. And then the next day you do the same. Now, I know people are going to freak out and go, well, what do you do with the starter that you take out? There is a plethora of recipes that you can use for sourdough starter. This morning I made crumpets from my sourdough starter discard. So the flour and water that I took out before I refreshed and added more to Harry, I had a full cup that I had that was discard that I was just going to throw away. And I put a little bit of bicarb soda and a little bit of sugar in it and turned it into beautiful crumpets. They go all bubbly and you cook them in an egg ring and they just work out perfect. And I just put maple syrup and butter over them and it was lovely for breakfast. So that's what you want to be doing every day, is discarding a certain amount. And we'll talk about discarded recipes later on in the month, but you will take out a certain portion. Whatever portion you keep, you're going to add equal amount of flour, equal amount of water, whip it up and leave it on your bench again. Now you're going to do that for between 2 and 7 days is probably the best way to go. And really don't stress about it. If it doesn't look like it's kind of fizzing up enough, and that it'll creep up on you, and when it happens you'll be like, oh, shit, didn't see that coming. So discard half, add your equal portions of flour and water, mix, cover, do again for 7 days. Now, around day 3 or 4, you should start to see a real bubble action happening. You might notice a little bit of bubble on the first 3 days, but day 3 or 4 and beyond, you'll start to notice some real bubbles occurring. When that bubble starts occurring, have a sniff of it. Get used to the smell of it. It should smell tangy. So some people describe it as a yogurt smell. Some people call it a vinegar smell. I always think it's got a slight nail polish remover kind of odor to it. And that's not a bad thing. That's what you want to happen. You also will notice that you'll have a rise and fall after feeding. Now, if you're doing it, say, last thing at night or first thing in the morning, it doesn't matter when you do it. But if you're missing that rise and fall, the best way is to get an elastic band or just even a black texture, like one that washes off glass, and mark on the glass where it is when you first mix it together. Through the night, just have a quick glance at it and see, and you'll notice that it's rising above the line. I sometimes put an elastic band around my glass jar. So I'll put an elastic band around the point where the line is and see if it goes up higher. Now, this morning when I did it, it was probably about there, and it's already risen that much, and it's been 4 hours. So in 4 hours, and I've got the wood fire burning in here at the moment. So in 4 hours, it's nearly doubled. And that's what you want. You want it to get to that double size. So that rising and falling just simply means that the fermentation process is working and that your starter is beginning to have a life of its own. Now, if you don't see anything on days 1 and 2, don't stress. Everything's settling in. The bacteria takes a little while to kick in. Don't panic. Don't overfeed it, whatever you do. Just do the same amount each day. Between 3 and 5, you should start to see the action. You should start to see the bubbles. It should start to smell a little bit sour. It should start to rise a bit. By day 6, 7, it should be rising within 4 to 6 hours of feeding. And that means you're almost at a point when you can start using your starter. Not quite. I always say go a little bit longer than that. Now, at that point, if you do notice that you have a really strong nail polish remover smell or a really rancid kind of smell, it just means that the bad bacteria is outnumbering the good bacteria. So that possibly means that it's being left too long between feedings. And the feedings will be dependent on the temperature in your house. So in a cold environment, I can leave starter on the bench for 3 days in a cold environment and have no rancid smell at all. In a warm environment, or like when I've got the wood fire going through winter, I do notice that I either have to put it in the fridge to slow it down or I have to feed it more often. If you do get that rancid smells, particularly in that first, 7 days, 10 days kind of period, I would say feed it more often. So if you're feeding 100, if you're doing 100 every 24 hours, what I would say is drop it back to 50 and do 50 every 12 hours. So keep 50 grams of starter, 50 flour, 50 water. Then in 12 hours time, keep 50 out of that and do 50 water, 50 flour. What it means is that you just need to get that balance right with the amount of bacteria in there. So you need to feed it a bit more often. And again, it'll depend on the bacteria in your environment. It'll depend on the temperature in your house, all these other factors that play in. It is a science experiment, and no two sourdough starters are the same. In fact, people swap pieces like chunks of sourdough starter to mix in with their sourdough starter to try and promote a difference of bacteria, because when you are making the same sourdough starter, Harry in this house for the same amount of time, he has the same bacteria in him that he's always going to have in this environment. If I introduced a different bacteria, it could spark him up and make him more fluffy. It could add a different tang to the bread, things like that. So people experiment with that kind of thing all the time. I don't want you to worry about that just yet, because I think you just need to get started. That's the main thing, get the sourdough starter up and bubbling. But what you want to aim for is by the end of the first week, you should have a rise and fall that happens predictably after a feeding. So around that 4 to 6 hour mark, it should be rising right up and then starting to fall again. You should have a pleasant sour smell. So not stinky or rotten or rancid, but just slightly acetone. It should be able to double in size within 4 to 6 hours. So that rise should be essentially doubling what you look like you've got in your jar. And the best and simplest way to test if your sourdough starter is ready to go is to do a float test, just like with eggs. Except, well, in this case, with eggs, we want them to sink to the bottom when they're good. When we want sourdough starter to be good, we want it to float. So just take a teaspoon, that's all you need, is a teaspoon, cup of water, like preferably a nice clear cup of water that you can see through the sides of, and drop a teaspoon of sourdough starter onto the top of the water. Don't dunk it in and shake it up or anything like that. Just gently place it on top of the water. If it floats, if it stays completely on the surface of the water and looks really light and fluffy and floats, you are good to go. You're ready to make bread. It's it's pretty, like, even when I do it now, like, I know, I can tell by looking at it when it's ready and it's floating. But I still do the float test. I still drop a teaspoon into my water before I make a loaf of bread, just to make sure that it is floating. And that way I know that I'm going to have yeast, or have, the wild yeast actually do what I want it to do and make that bread nice and fluffy. Now, I just briefly go over flours. I'm going to talk about flours next week, but just so that you know which ones you're kind of looking at. Rye flour, great for starters. It's got lots of enzymes in it, lots of nutrients, lots of bacteria, lots of stuff that the yeast and the bacteria love and will go. It should bubble within a couple of days if you're using rye, but don't panic if it doesn't. Give it to at least that 5-day mark. If your starter, if you've used normal flour and it seems to be really slow and sluggish and not picking off, maybe get yourself some rye flour and just chuck a bit of rye flour in there. You can mix and match. People get really antsy about it, but honestly, I've mixed and matched and not had any problems at all. I just, with my starter, not necessarily trying to convert it over to bread. Just put a little bit of rye in and see how you go. Spelt flour, which is an ancient grain that has a slight nutty flavour. It has really good fermentation properties, and sometimes you'll see spelt sourdough at the bakers, and they use it because of that. Now, your starter may not rise as high with white flour. With white flour, I've got written here, God, I don't know what I've got written there. Spelt has a low gluten content, so if you're mixing a spelt starter into white floured bread, you may not get as much rise out of it, but it'll still be very bubbly. You'll still get a lot of flavour out of your sourdough, out of your starter. It's really good for people who have a mild gluten sensitivity. Spelt flour is something that I've started to kind of dabble in a bit because I wanted to see how my body reacted with it. But it can be a little bit hard to form into a dough. So you just have to be a bit more delicate when you're making your bread. Unbleached white flour, plain flour. Look, it's what most people have in the pantry. And if you are on a budget, I would absolutely say do not go and buy any special flours. Use your plain bread flour. Now, that being said, you don't have to use straight up bread flour. You can just use plain flour. If that's all you've got, start with what you've got. Don't go crazy. Wait and see if it's going to be something long term that you're going to be using. That being said, I get baker's flour from Costco in a 25 kilo bag. And the 25 kilo bag works out, I think it's $24.99, so it's $1 a kilo essentially. That's Australian dollars, obviously. Now, that means if I'm using 500 grams to make a loaf of bread, it's essentially costing me 50 cents a loaf of bread. which is what I love about it because I'm a tight ass and I don't like spending money. So definitely go with the white flour. If that's all you've got or you're on a budget, go with that. It can take a little bit longer to get your starter up to super fluff stage, but like I say, so cheap. And go the 50-50-50 to start with. If you're on a budget, you don't need to make as much, and you can make smaller loaves too than what I make. It's a very strong, I've got written here, strong and predictable. That sounds so masculine, but anyway, it's a good one for bread. And my kids, certainly, that's the pick for flavour that my kids have, is to have that one. Now, gluten-free flours, things like brown rice, buckwheat, stuff like that. You can make sourdough starter with them. They're always going to be a little bit more delicate, a little bit harder to get to that fluff stage. You sometimes need to feed them twice a day on the regular, not just when you're trying to pump them back up again. But they're really good for making things like flatbreads and pancakes. If that's what you're like, if you want to still be able to enjoy having bread kind of products. I actually made a note here that brown rice flour is one of the most stable options. I've not used brown rice flour, but I must have been doing some research and I've written that in my notes. So there you go. But, if you're steering away from gluten, give it a crack. And if you do give it a crack, post something on social and link me in, because I'd love to see how you go with different kinds of flours, because I've got to be honest, I've stuck to the real basics: rye, wholemeal, plain, white, spelt, things like that. Now, the reason why flours do matter, and the reason why gluten-free flours sometimes are a little bit more problematic, is that because they have different enzymes in them and different microbial loads in them, and that can impact your sourdough starter getting to that real fermentation stage. Now, there is another thing, and it's something that I didn't work out until I started using baker's flour as opposed to just standard plain flour, is the absorption rate of water. I didn't realise until probably 6 or 7 loaves in, my baker's flour is super, super absorbent and just sucks all the moisture in. So I've actually had to increase the amount of water sometimes. So sometimes when I'm doing my starter, if it's looking a little dry, I'll just add a little bit extra water. I wouldn't recommend doing that until you are used to your starter and you've got a real handle for how it responds. It can be problematic adding too much water. It can make it not fuzz and not fizz and ferment. And definitely one of the things that they say, if you're not getting enough fermentation out of it, is to cut back a little bit on your water. But you just have to play it by ear and get used to the flour. Now, I would say dabble with different flours to start with, and once you work it out, go from there. But we'll talk more about that next week. Now, definitely stick to the one flour for the first 6, 7 to 10 days kind of thing until you get a real handle. But then you can chop and change and you can make a few different things. I just want to touch on some frequently asked problems that you may have with your starter. And the one is that the nail polish smell is too strong and it smells like paint thinners. Now, I always say it smells like nail polish to me. My nose is fairly sensitive, so I have a sniff and go, oh, there's a different undertone of nail polish remover in there. If you are getting too much smell and it's too much like paint thinners, then that means that the acetone, the byproduct of the fermentation process, has overtaken. And it means that you've probably got out of balance with good bacteria and bad bacteria. It's not going to impact your starter. You don't have to throw it all out and start again. Don't ever do that unless there's I'll give you one reason later on in a second why you throw it all out and start again. If it's just a really strong acetone smell or paint thinner smell, do not stress. It just means that it's struggling to ferment. So feed more often is the best thing you can do. Feed more regularly, more often, cut it down in size until you get it back on track. So that just means it's been sitting around for too long. That being said, I have left sourdough starter in the fridge for 3 months. 3 months and not touched it. And when I got it out, I'll describe in a second what it had, but it was fine. I fed it. I had to feed it for about 3 or 4 days before I could use it because it needed a real boost to get it back going again. But it was just a matter of feeding regularly and getting it going. And some people go, oh, no, you can't. You've got to be very delicate with sourdough. I have treated Harry so bad over the last 2 years. There's been times when he's been stuck in the back of the fridge and ignored, left on the counter for 3 or 4 days and ignored. And you know what? There's nothing that a few quick rapid fire feedings can't fix up. So don't stress. Things like doing 3 feedings over 36 hours is a real boost for them. So if it really has gone down that track where you think, oh, I may not be able to recover this, try that. Now, what I found on top of him after 3 months was a thing called hooch, which is a brown liquid that sits on top of the sourdough, on top of the starter. And it's just the byproduct of the yeast saying it's stressed and hungry and hasn't been fed enough. So when that happens, if you open it, you go, oh, acetone paint thinner, and you tip it, and there is it looks almost like black water on the top of the sourdough. Don't throw it out. It's still good. Drain as much of that off. And what you'll find is that the sourdough in the bottom, the actual dough will go quite firm underneath it. So the hooch will sit on top as a liquid layer and the stuff underneath will be quite firm. When that happens, just drain as much of the hooch off and then take a portion out of your sourdough, whether it's 50 grams or 100 grams, take a portion out of your sourdough starter, put it into a clean container, mix with flour and water, give it a good whip, leave it on the bench for 12 hours. Come back in 12 hours, do exactly the same. Come back another 12 hours, do exactly the same. And your sourdough starter will be back to normal in no time. You won't have to worry. Now, you can stir the hooch in to give a really distinct and strong sour flavour. I'm not a fan. I've never done it because I'm not a fan of the smell of it. So to me, it's like, no, I think I'm good. And honestly, after 3 feeds, it's back to its normal smell anyway. So yeah, don't throw it out if you've got hooch on it. Some people freak out. You see photos on Facebook pages where people go, oh my God, what's wrong with my sourdough starter? It's got this black liquid on top. Don't stress. It's all good. Okay. Next one, not rising or bubbling. And when I say that, I mean if you're on day 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and you're thinking, shit, it's still not bubbling. Like, why is it not bubbling? There's a couple of things that it could be that you might need to tweak a little bit. Some starters take a little bit longer. Like I said, some flours, not all flours are created equal. Some take a little bit longer to get going. But these are the things that you need to look at first before you scrap the idea and go, this is no good, I can't do this. Move it to a warmer spot. So ideally, 21 to 26 Celsius or 70 to 78 Fahrenheit is what you want to be aiming for. Now, if it's the middle of winter and you've got a wood fire going, your house should be warm enough. If it's summer and you live in a relatively warm climate, it will probably be almost too hot. Sometimes in summer here, I sometimes have to stick my sourdough starter in the fridge to slow it down because it gets a bit too carried away. But if your house is particularly drafty or cold, what you want to do is try and find somewhere to put it. Now, something that I do is I sometimes get a tea towel, like a fluffy tea towel, wrap it around the bottom and put an elastic band around to hold it. And all I feel that does is it stops some of the cold, because glass generally won't kind of hold in heat. It'll stop some of the cold and help retain some heat. Now, I have also sat it on, when I'm in a real hurry to get it moving, I'll microwave a tea towel so that it's nice and hot and sit it underneath the jar on top of the microwave tea towel. And it just puts a bit of heat into the jar and helps it to start that fermentation process. You could just have really dodgy white flour. If you can afford to, go and buy yourself a kilo of rye flour and even if you do half and half white flour, rye flour, it should be enough to kind of boost it back up. So go with 25 grams of rye, 25 grams of white, and 50 grams of water, and feed it a bit more often to see how you go. Make sure that you are stirring it well. And this is something that when I've been in a hurry, I've noticed that poor old Harry doesn't cope. If I'm in a hurry and I don't give it a good stir, it doesn't break down the flour. It doesn't break down the flour in it. It doesn't break up all of the flour. And so if you have lumps of flour in there, it's never going to kind of ferment properly because it's not all mixed in together properly. So you want to give it a really good mix. I use a fork to mix it because I find that it's easier to break everything down. Now, if it is chilly, you can sit your jar near a fireplace. You can sit near a kettle. You can even, I've heard of people who are trying to really boost it, turning their oven on just to heat the inside of their oven up and then putting the glass jar inside the oven. Turn the oven off, don't leave it on. You'll cook it. And just that ambient heat inside the oven is enough to get the fermentation process happening. Now, I'll go over one more and then I'll go the only reason why you'd ever throw it out. So if it rises and then falls again, some people freak out and go, well, it rose and then it fell, so it's no good. No, that's exactly what it does. The idea is that you want to get to know your starter well enough to know how many hours after you feed it is it going to rise to its peak height. Its peak height is when you want to use it to make bread. So it's a trial and error thing. That's why I call it the science experiment. Trial and error, time it, come back and check it every hour and see when it's getting to that level where it's high. Sorry, had a massive cough then, where it's getting high enough for you to do a float test. So you want it at its peak level. It will then drop, and that's more than okay. Don't worry about it. Leave it. Once you've used a bit, when you use a little bit out of it, you're going to refeed it, so it'll rise up again. Now, people get really frustrated about that. They go, oh, so do I feed it every time I take some out of it? You don't have to. I do, but you don't have to. But that's where you probably only just put, 50 grams, water and flour in there, and you'd be right. If it's getting a little bit thin too, the other thing is you might have too much water in there. Now, the only reason you would ever throw out your sourdough starter, because the thing is with sourdough starter, you want it to be old. You want it to have been around for a long time. The only time that you would ever do it, and I've never ever had it happen, but I've heard of horror stories and seen photos, pink, orange, or black mold on top of it. Now, not black hooch, not the liquid, actual mold on the sourdough. If you get mold anywhere, fuzzy spots, streaks of colour through it, anything like that, anything other than cream or grey, discard it. Once the mold gets in, you cannot get back from it. You can't come back from that. Now, when you do discard it, throw it in the bin. It's not good for anything. Make sure that you wash everything that it was touching. So if you're going to use the same glass jar that you just discarded moldy sourdough starter out of, sterilize that jar. Make sure that you give it a really good clean in hot soapy water, air dry it, really spotless, because any little bit of mold in there will come back in your next batch. So you'd be defeating the purpose. Now, the way to get around the mold thing is smaller feeds more frequently so that it doesn't have as long between feeds, because that's when the bad bacteria overtakes the good bacteria, and that's when you get mold. Just remember that grey liquid on top, if it's hooch, it's not mold. Don't stress. And that's everything that I needed to cover today. The main thing, oh, excuse me, been talking too long. The cough is going to start coming back with a vengeance in a sec. The main thing is don't give up with sourdough starter. It is a time-consuming process, as in not that it takes a long time. It takes me 5 minutes to refresh it each morning. But you have to be consistent every day feeding it. If you're in a really hot environment, every 12 hours feeding it. If you're in a really cold environment, you can go every 48 hours and feed it. But in a cold environment, it won't grow as quick, which means you can't make bread as quick either. Now, one thing that people get really, really stuck on is, what do I do when I don't want to be feeding it? When I want to take a break from bread making, you're going away for the weekend, you're not going to be bread making, what do? Stick it in the fridge. That's all I do. And I have stuck it in the fridge, like I said before, up to 3 months and gone down and it's still been fine. But you can stick it in the fridge for a month and not have to refresh it. What I would say is keep an eye on it. If there's any mold, obviously that's not great. That means bad bacteria got in. But in the fridge, all the fermentation processes slow down. So you can essentially keep it in the fridge, take it out once a week, feed it, so discard half, top up half, and then give it a good mix, wait till it starts to ferment again, whack it back in the fridge. In fact, some people don't even wait till it ferments again. They just whack it straight back in the fridge. While it's in the fridge, fermentation will still happen. It just happens really, really slowly. And that's why we put our bread doughs, when we're making sourdough, if you want to slow down the proofing process, we whack it in the fridge overnight. Slows everything down. It still happens. The process is still happening, but it slows everything down. So anytime you need to take a break, don't discard it and think I'll just start again later. That's a really valuable sourdough starter you've got there. Whack it in the fridge, hang on to it, just once a week feed it if you're taking a break from making bread or if you're going away on rec leave, something like that. When a couple of years ago when we lived at Gunning, the handy helper and my 2 kids and I all went to America for a month, and we had house sitters coming into the house. I didn't want to bother them with the whole, can you feed my sourdough? I literally just put it in the back of the fridge for a month. And when we got back, the first week we were back, I got it out, discarded half, fed it, did that every 24 hours for about 3 days. And before you knew it, Harry was back to, because my old sourdough starter was called Harry as well. Harry was back to normal and I was back to making bread again without any problems. So it is very resilient, and don't think that you have to treat it with kid gloves. It's really not that precious. You can really treat it mean and keep it clean to a degree. But with mould, no mucking around with mould. If there's mould on it, throw it, start again. Now, what I am going to include in the show notes is a printout. It's a printable tracker, and I'll have it a download done up for it at mojohomestead.net/sourdough starter. It's a 2-week sheet, like a timetable of when to feed and a little area for you to make notes to see whether or not it's rising and how it's going and what flour you've used and all that kind of stuff. Print it out, use it, send me a photo of your tracker and your sourdough and let me know how it's gone, and we'll go from there. Any questions, reach out to me and have a chat and everything and ask questions. I'm more than happy to help out where possible. I am still learning with sourdough myself. After 6 years, I would say that. You will make more failures than you have wins to start with, but don't let that stop you, because when you start getting those wins, boy, oh boy, they start coming real quick. And you get to a point where you're doing it almost on autopilot because it just becomes second nature. You really get a feel for it. It's one of those things, a bit like growing vegetables or, managing chickens or milking goats. You get a feel for it where you know what's working and what's not working and what's making it easy and what's not making it easy. And once you do that, you'll be all over it. So as I said, next week we're going to talk about flours in a bit more depth. And I was going to try and have a bit of a fiddle with some gluten-free flours and see how I go, just to see, how hard it is. Because I've heard horror stories, but maybe I'll try the brown rice flour thing. Anyway, if you've got a photo, post it, link me in on social media. I'd love to see what your starter looks like. If you live near Canberra and you would like a piece of Harry, because, he's a bit fluffy, let me know, because I have always got an abundance of sourdough. So I'm more than happy to pass over some starter to you, which when you get starter from somebody else, it just boosts that program along a little bit more. Usually within 2 or 3 days, you can get your sourdough going. It will take a little while to adjust because it needs to sap into some of those bacteria in your environment, but it should pep up pretty quickly. So let me know, DM me if you need a piece of sourdough starter. Otherwise, I will leave it there and I will talk to you all next week when we discuss flours. Thanks everyone. Bye for now. Well, that's it for today's episode of Ditch the Store. If you're loving the journey to self-sufficiency, be sure to subscribe. You can also leave a review for us or share this episode with a friend who's ready to break up with their supermarket. If you've got questions or success stories, we'd love to hear about them on the socials. You can also find me at www.mojohomestead.net. Until next time, keep raising, growing and making. And remember, life's too short for store-bought eggs.